share will stop other sound share. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. Okay. Right. Can you see the Menti?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So for everyone who's already here, feel free to go ahead and participate just to find out who's here. And for those of you who play multiple roles, I think it will allow you to add more than one answer if you'd like to. Okay, lots of good roles here. Got a good mix of people. Okay. Got a couple of coaches, Scrum Master, business development. Good. All right, good. All right, well, I'll get started. And so thank you first for coming. Muchas gracias. Buenos dias. Bom dia. I don't know if there's anyone Portuguese on the call today, but it's nice to have all of you. And it's a delight and an honor for me to be with you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation here. We can get started. Okay. Right. Can everybody see the presentation now?
Yeah, we can see it, Matthew.
Okay. Okay. Super. All right. So this was inspired a few months ago. I actually wrote a blog post on this, and it was on LinkedIn, and someone called it. I had people say, "It's very inspiring. Is great, controversial, crazy." So I don't know. Maybe you'll have a range of feelings yourself about this very topic. So this idea of stop writing stories and start validating working software. So today, this is what we hope to accomplish. So to learn more effective ways of collaborating, learn how to create a team of product missionaries instead of mercenaries. So I know there's a couple of you, sound like product people, Scrum Masters, coaches. This idea, I think it comes from John Doerr actually, but Marty Kagan is more famous for it. You want to have a team of missionaries, not mercenaries. So we'll talk about that. How to identify problems and goals to solve and things problems to solve rather than just providing solutions for people, and how do we invite our teammates to solve them. So I think that will apply to everybody on the call today. And perhaps most importantly, this idea of unlearning. So we're going to learn some things, but we need to unlearn some things first. And so that's hard for us as humans. And I speak as someone who's had to unlearn a lot of things. I've been doing Agile stuff for 16 years or so. And so a lot of what we do just repeated and we kind of follow the same patterns. We need to break out of those things sometimes. So we'll talk about unlearning. All right, so if you didn't already have a chance to do the Menti on what role you are, go ahead and do that now, but I'm going to keep going. First, a little history. Um, the epic history of Agile. So if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings, this idea that things were, that the Earth was in a state of severe concern, and the Dark Lord of Waterfall was going to be ruling everything. And yet, in 2001, this intrepid band, this courageous group of people, the Agile Alliance, they came together and they beat the Dark Lord of Waterfall, and everything was saved. Everything was fine after that. Uh, but kind of like in the Lord of the Rings, the story goes, but the hearts of men are easily corrupted, and you can see here the ring, the user story. And so somewhere something happened that messed things up again, and this the Dark Lord of Waterfall continued to live. And some things that should not have been forgotten were lost. History became legend, legend became myth, and for 20 years the spirit of Agile passed out of all knowledge. So maybe that's a bit much. That's probably not the case, but this is sometimes how it feels to me. I've been working in different roles. I started a long time ago. My first Agile role was as a QA on the team, is an XP type of team, and I've done other roles over the years. I do coaching and consulting now, and this is sometimes how it feels. And so, anyway, what happened? What's going on? So, my observation is that stories have been corrupted in some way. It's kind of like the Lord of the Rings. The ring, the power of the ring has been corrupted, and um, and what has was started off as lightweight way to develop software, empower people to develop, has actually become the heavyweight process that it was meant to replace. And so what's happened? So Jeff Patton, who's also at the conference, is said this. So stories went sideways from the very beginning. So almost as soon as the concept came out there, Kent Beck came up with the idea of a story just being a quick way to express an idea that we needed to talk about, we needed to solve through conversation, through collaborating. And speaking of Kent Beck, so he said this, this is not long ago. He said, somebody came up to me and said, we want to do software development, but we just can't stand all this ceremony and agile stuff. We just want to write some programs. Tears came into my eyes. How can it be that we're right back where we were 20 years ago? So I don't know if any of you have experienced this kind of heavyweight process that user stories can lead to. And so I want to reclaim some of the spirit of what Kent was talking about 20 years ago when they came up with the manifesto. And I think hopefully all of us have had an experience with Agile where it actually is that true spirit of Agile, focusing on working software over comprehensive documentation, all the rest of it. And we want to reclaim that and get back to it. There's some things we need to unlearn though. All right, so just a quick review. So working software over comprehensive documentation. Back when I started, we actually used these physical note cards. This is a movie. This is even older than the Agile Manifesto. But back when we first started, we actually wrote our stories on note cards. And when we were finished, we actually literally ripped the cards up and we were finished, because it reminded us that the story was not the end product. The story was a means to an end. And so it gave us great pleasure to celebrate the accomplishment of the working software by ripping up the card. Today, however, it's a very different story. I don't know if anyone uses Jira, but Jira was named for Gojira, Godzilla. And I think our systems, our story, user story systems have become like a monster. We cannot kill it. They become more powerful than the actual process of creating software. And so it's almost like we've turned around. And so now comprehensive documentation is the thing that we rely on and is the order of the day. Okay, the next one, this is one of the principles. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information is face-to-face conversation. All right, so this is a team I worked with. They were great. They used user stories, but only in the most lightweight way. Every time they had a user story that the team was ready to work on, the product owner would come over and sit with the team. They'd have a conversation. You see there's 5 people here, right? It's a high bandwidth conversation. This is what we're meant to be doing. And I realize in a remote environment, we can't have in-person conversations like this, but the idea is still the same. It's a promise for a conversation. And yet, what I've seen with teams over and over again is that stories tend to get in the way of conversation. They actually create a barrier between people. So every time we create a story and it's more than one line of text, it's actually putting a barrier between us. And so that leads to some anti-patterns in terms of communication. So if you see here, how do conversations happen in regular life? Think about your friends or your family. Um, they're spontaneous, they're organic, they happen naturally. And yet in agile teams, we've created these very unnatural kind of set times for refinement meetings, for backlog grooming. They're time boxed. That's not the way conversation actually is meant to happen. It's meant to be organic. It's meant to be natural. Um, Conversation is synchronous. It happens in real time as opposed to asynchronously. And there's kind of like bits and pieces, right? So the richness of conversation actually leads us to better understanding. And it's more humanizing. It's more direct. It's personal. As soon as we create a user story, especially in an electronic tool, we're dehumanizing. We're creating an impersonal intermediary between us and another person. And as I said, we want to aim for high bandwidth, deep understanding. It's hard enough for people to communicate, uh, let alone if we add extra tools and extra layers in between. It leads to more assumptions, more questions, and it actually makes things more complicated. Okay, so let's go back to Menti. And if you can go, I have to advance the slide, I think, here. Right, just a second. Go back to Menti, and I'm going to go to the next one. Thank you all for adding your roles, by the way. Okay. Okay, see if we can do this one. How is your team measured? I'm going to do a new share. Okay. And do let me know if you have any technical problems or if you need help. Looks like people were able to get in. And I think on this one, you can choose more than one if you need to as well. Okay, take another couple seconds. Okay. Okay, great. I'm going to go back to the presentation here. So the manifesto talks about working software being the primary measure of progress. You've probably all seen the agile value curve, right? This is the whole business reason for agility, is that we can deliver value earlier, more appropriately. We're building the right thing. And yet so often we are measured and this is implicating everybody. These are the things that it's usually velocity, usually story points, right? And I think that was true. If we look at the group's responses, right, we had 16 people talk about velocity or points. And so we really want to reorient ourselves toward delivery of value. And so this idea of validated value. Validated value is actually when we know that we've delivered value. It actually doesn't always happen. It's possible, and it should be the case, that we actually delivered the wrong thing sometimes, just because we don't know absolutely ahead of time what will be valuable to our customers. But the important thing is that we want to be measuring working software. That's the primary thing. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. Does anybody know what the number one waste in software is, according to a few people? Mary Poppendieck, I think I got this from. It's building the wrong thing. So user story has an implication that it's definitely the thing that we need to build, a feature, a user story, and it gets put in a backlog. A backlog has a connotation that everything in the backlog needs to get done. And so it gives us this false impression that everything that we have listed in a story, in a feature, in a backlog is the thing that needs to get done. So much of that is actually not true. We need to be able to work quickly, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, to validate whether we've built the right thing. But this is a huge waste in software delivery. And so what's happened is that the world of user stories has oppressed us, has become so big, it's overwhelmed how we do things. It's tricked us into thinking that everything that we have there is actually going to be used by a user and the right thing. That's not the case. Peter Drucker, this is a great expression. There's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all, right? So we've really gotten good at, our Jira boards are all tricked out and they're all linked and they report everything. And we're so efficient at that, aren't we? And yet it's likely that most of that stuff is not even things we need to be doing. We're focusing on the wrong things. We're emphasizing the wrong things, right? So if you think about in your own world, so I know there's a variety of people. I think there's some developers, testers, scrum masters, coaches. There's an RT, I think, in the group. How much of your time and effort and your conversation, your team time, if you will, do you spend doing the business of stories and focusing on those outputs? And compare that to how much time you're spending actually validating, have we built the right thing? Have we solved someone's real problem? That's the thing that matters. So I don't know what, if anyone wants to come off mute and say what percentage you think. Is it 50-50? Is it 80-20? Is it 20-80? Anyone? Or you can say you have a friend. You don't have to say it yourself. I see Pablo. Pablo's laughing. I don't know if it's because he has a friend or because it's his own life. Right. So again, we want to minimize the stuff on the left. We want to maximize the amount of work not done. Right. So again, all this stuff can kind of just become the life of what Agile is, how it's practiced, and it's not really the way we're meant to be doing it. Okay, so you don't have to read all this stuff. I'll publish these slides, but these are just, in terms of thinking about the Agile Manifesto, the things on the right side, the things that we're not meant to be doing. To me, these are all quotes that I've heard from people over the years, and some things I've said myself. Right? These are all things that they're kind of anti-patterns. If you hear these things, if you hear yourself saying these things, you might want to call a timeout and say, wait a second, maybe I'm emphasizing the wrong things here. Is there a better way to do this? Is there a different way to do this? And so I don't know if any of this have been things you've heard or seen in your own team, but it should be a signal to us that we need to stop and rethink how we're working. Okay, right. So maybe I've identified a problem. Maybe I've identified some things you've experienced. So what do we do? Is there any hope at all? Is the Dark Lord of Waterfall bound to win in the end? I don't think so. So Barry O'Reilly, I used to work with Barry. He has this great quote, and it's about unlearning. He actually has a book called Unlearn. And he says, we need to break the cycles of behaviors that were effective in the past, but are no longer relevant in the current business climate, and that now may limit or even stand in the way of our success. And I think that quote for me really does apply to how user stories have gained a life of their own in our work. We need to really unlearn that. We need to think, let's go back to maybe trying something completely new. Um, and what I'll propose is a bit radical, perhaps. I'm not saying that you need to stop doing user stories altogether. All right. So I don't want you to hear me saying that. But I do want you to hear me saying that we need to really fundamentally unlearn some of the behaviors that we've inherited. And so I'm going to propose a few things that you might want to try now. This doesn't mean replacing user stories, but I can tell you that I've had a couple of experiences recently working in teams developing software where we haven't used user stories. And it's been quite successful and quite invigorating. Some people told me on LinkedIn, this is not possible. You can't possibly create software without user stories. Um, and you absolutely can. People were doing it before 2001, before user stories came into being, and people have done it since, right? And so it is possible. So, but I'm not saying completely get rid of user stories, but I am saying we need to reduce their importance. We need to rethink. We need to unlearn how we've been thinking and using user stories. Right. So Jeff Patton himself, I think this is a really helpful thing to know. Stories aren't a different way of documenting, they're a different way of working. And so often we treat them as it's a different way of documenting. We put it in the user story format. We need to have acceptance criteria. We need to put it in the Jira ticket. It's fundamentally a different way of working. And I think they're so easy that it's easy to miss this, but that's a really important distinction here. Okay, so what are some alternatives? So if I'm saying don't focus so much on user stories, what am I saying to do? So they're this. So have a clear product vision and goals. Uh, use enabling constraints and explicit freedoms. I'll talk about that in a minute. Trust and psychological safety. Having a low level of work in progress, how many things we're doing at once, and tightening our feedback loops. So I'll claim to you that if you focus on these things, you may not need to use user stories in the same way you've used them in the past. The problem is that these things are very hard. Okay, clear product vision and goals. So one of the things that I think is really helpful for empowering your team is having product principles or a product manifesto. I don't know how many, did anybody on the call today, on the session today, use these in your team? I know there's a couple of product people, maybe some scrum masters, coaches. These are really helpful. It's not a particular feature. It's not any kind of thing that needs to be developed particularly, but it's a mindset. It's an approach to say, how do we want to build this product? What's important to us? What guides our thinking? And you can see this is from Slack, actually. I don't know if you use Slack, but um, for me, it's a great tool. Um, but this is, if you imagine you're on the Slack team and these principles are there to guide you. So we want to build something people want. Okay, that's interesting. A couple other things down here. We want to think about who we want our customers to become. We want them to be less frustrated by lack of visibility into what's going on. We want them to be masters of their own information. And we want them to be relaxed, productive workers. So if you're on the team and whatever role you're in, if you think about these are guiding principles to everything we do, and it allows us to make better decisions. So if you think about the traditional model of a user story, it's created by a product owner and then spoon-fed to the team. That's really taking away some of your freedom. I'll talk about that in a minute, but this is really meant to guide people, help make people make decisions, especially when the product owner is not available, right? So this is the big picture of a product, and I think it's really helpful. So that's one thing you can do. Moving from stories to problems to solve. This is, again, this I think gets us back to the heart of the manifesto, the heart of what user stories are meant to be doing. Really, instead of following this form, and again, I think the user story form is useful. So I don't want to Yeah, I don't want you to hear me saying that the user story canonical format is bad. It can be useful, but I think it gets people too focused on the details. And we need to allow people to think about what's the problem we're trying to solve. So for those of you who are product people on the call, product owners, product managers, I think there's some business developer people, development people, get good at determining what the problem to solve is. All right, you don't need to worry about the solution so much. I think that's one of the pressures that we put on product owners. You need to figure out what to build. No, you don't. You need to get really good at defining the problem and then allowing your team. This is where that idea of missionaries, not mercenaries, comes in, is that you empower people to think creatively. This is why so many people got into the business in the first place. People enjoy solving problems. And so rely on them, enlist them to help you solve your problems. Don't feel like you need to solve everything for them. And so focusing, if you're going to write something down, just write the problem. What's the problem we're trying to solve? In this case, you can see when we reduce the analyst's time to look up a financial report. That's pretty clear. So there's lots of ways to implement that. But you'll notice that there's implicit in that is a measurement. The goal is to reduce someone's time to do some task. We don't care how we do it. The goal is to help them do that. And so thinking about what's the problem to solve and how are we going to measure that, that can give tremendous creative freedom to your team. Okay, enabling constraints and explicit freedoms. So this is a client product owner. She said, we really need to give freedom to our developers. That's interesting. This is from a tester. I actually want to stop using user stories so I can creatively explore the system. Speaking as a former tester, a former QA person, this is true. You're kind of limited to whatever the bounds of the story are, and really, when you're trying to think deeply about a system, you actually go beyond that. And so, this can actually free developers, testers, user experience designers, etc. This is a tool that I've used for leaders, but also it works well in teams. So this idea of this is called a leader back briefing, but there's two very important parts of it in this boundaries area. So we want to explicitly say what our freedoms are and what our constraints are. So you can see some examples. So some freedom. So you can collaborate with anyone in the organization. You can commit your code whenever you want to. You can use any framework. When we make those things clear, people are able to make better decisions on their own. So they don't become so dependent on us, and it creates a leader mentality rather than a leader follower mentality. And I know that those of you who are on the call who are product owners, who are scrum masters, who are leads in different ways, you don't want your people to become dependent on you. You want them to make good decisions as you would. And so these are ways that you can kind of give people a lens to see the world as you see it, right? Helping people make better decisions. Constraints. So, right. So you can do whatever you want to. Just use a technology we already support. Okay. You can spend up to $5,000. This is, a lot of organizations have people allowed to use their own budgets, right? This actually, there's an interesting story about a hotel chain where they empowered their employees, their frontline people, to actually do whatever they wanted to with up to a certain budget. And so one person who was he worked as a bellhop, a person moving luggage, and he saw that there was a handicapped person, a person in a wheelchair, who was trying to go to the beach, and he used his money, his budget, to actually build a path to the beach so that this person in the wheelchair could actually get to the beach. That's a great example of empowering people by using, excuse me, enabling constraints. Another one is make sure someone else works with you. We don't care what you do, just make sure someone else is seeing what you're doing, working with you. Whatever. These are examples. But the idea is that it helps people make better decisions about what to build and how to work. This happened not too long ago. This is Henrik Knieber. You probably know him from a lot of different things he's done, Spotify model, etc. But he's working with Minecraft now, and this is interesting because this really cool feature, the crawl feature, it wasn't started by a user story. They had no user story for this. It was an accident. And so we want to allow for this creative emergence, for things to happen. We want to learn from feedback from users, from how we're actually using software in order to build the right things. This is a great quote again, saying this is really part of the art of software delivery development. And he really quotes, "We need to speak to customers and not hide behind POs. Our product owners, we need to bring people together. We need to facilitate those conversations with customers, getting people really using our software, even if it's in a test environment." But the idea is that we're unleashing the creative energies, the creative power of our team. You don't have to do it all yourself as a product owner. Okay, really quickly, trust and psychological safety. You've probably read the importance of this for team behaviors, team performance, but it really comes into play here because I think what happens, and the reason we use user stories so often is because we don't have trust, right? We use it to cover ourselves. We use it to push work onto people. We don't trust that people will get things done, right? That's why we track velocity, right? We compare velocity. We do story points, right? We need to have a really high level of trust and psychological safety. If I'm a product owner, I need to trust that people are going to be able to carry out things. It might be different from my solution, right? And so this is for those of you who are product owners or product people, being able to say this to yourself. Yeah, Pablo, right? You have to admit it's actually very freeing for yourself too. I don't necessarily know all the answers. This is a friend of mine who's a product owner, client. This is very liberating for them because now we have the power of the team. And this is again what we're talking about when we're saying engaging, empowering the team. A low level of work in progress. Part of the reason that we use stories is it kind of like feeds. It's a vicious cycle, right? We've got dozens of stories on the board, so of course we need to keep track of them with documentation. So it kind of creates its own monster. But if you have fewer things in progress, you're only solving one thing at a time. You don't really need heavyweight documentation, right? Well, yeah, I remember that you at the planning meeting 2 weeks ago, you wanted this and then this and this. No, just start working on something, the next most important thing. Work on only a couple of things at a time. You don't have to document so many things, right? So I don't know if you do mobbing. Mobbing is a great example of this. It's a great manifestation of people solving one problem at a time, declaring victory, and moving on to the next thing. It's very energizing. How much work in progress does this team have? Looks like one.
One.
Yeah, they're working on one thing at a time. You don't have to write anything down. This is where the conversation is happening, right? And again, even in remote environments, we all have communications. Just talk about it. Discuss what's going on. You don't have to have so much stuff in your memory cache to be able to focus on what you're doing next. Okay, tight feedback loops. One of the Agile feedback loops is a demo, right? And so it's there for a reason. It's actually we're meant to get feedback from people, and so often I see this time and time again. People, it's a big theater, it's a big production. People, all the stakeholders come, and yet we're not really actually getting feedback. It's actually too formal, and so I advocate the idea of just sharing as soon as stuff is done, sharing it with the user, right? So this is the experience I had recently. We're building an online game, and basically, as soon as we finished a new feature, every day, every other day, we would invite someone to test it for us and get feedback. And they'd be like, "No, this is horrible. This is worse than it was before." Okay, that's fine, right? But the idea is that when you're working in small increments and small batch sizes are almost always better. Small change sets are almost always better. Hey, take a look at this. And again, it's kind of like the same pattern we have in UX where rather than going and having a fully fledged pixel perfect design and saying, how do you like this? We're going with a very rough first approach. And we're saying, how does this work for you? Does this work or not? And getting feedback and evolving. Marty Kagan talks about how modern product companies actually plan to fail up to 80% of the time the first try. Now that's really significant because we're not used to failing at all. But when you think about that, that's on the first try. So the idea is that as soon as we get something done, we expose it to someone. Because until we expose it, we're we're blocked from feedback. We're blocked from learning. We're blocked from validating whether we've built the right thing. And so we need to discipline ourselves and allow, and this is why psychological safety and trust come into the picture. We want to be able to expose little bits of change as soon as we've done it and get feedback as soon as we can. We don't need the theater of demos, right? You might even say every other stand-up meeting, we're demoing something to people, right? I love the stand-up meeting. It's a good, useful thing to plan for the day, but it's something you might want to incorporate. You might want to just demo the thing you did yesterday to people. Invite users, user proxies, whatever it is. Because again, that informality is actually going to be helpful. The formal stuff is too formal. Okay. Yeah, this is actually a client of ours that they intentionally said, how can we, our customer satisfaction scores are low. How can we improve that? They started inviting them to demos and actually doing more frequent demos. And so they had an actual program, an actual initiative in the organization where they started really saying, how do we get these people involved and closer? And so this was from the team member, right? So their team had a better understanding of the needs of the people using the product. So how many of you actually have met your customers, met users, right? Talk with them on a regular basis to understand whether you're building the right solutions. This is from the client now. So this is the person who's actually using their software. It allows us to have a two-way communication input into what's being built for us. And so customers love this too, right? Now you have to be careful, if you have to train your customer a bit to say, you're not going to get, it's not going to be perfect the first time, but we need, when you tell them that you want to build the software for them with them in mind, it can be very helpful. Okay, you've probably heard the idea of concept to cache. What is done for you? What is done in the life of a story? So if someone writes a story, you do backlog grooming, refinement, you do the story in a sprint, and you deliver it. You maybe put it somewhere and someone else will put it in their production somewhere. That's the end of the life of the story, right? But that's not really what done is. We might, if we're a bit advanced, we might say done is when it's deployed, but we're still not even done because we don't know if we've built the right thing. It's still a guess. We haven't validated anything. All we validated is that we were able to build the thing we wanted to build, which is great. That's nice, but it really, we're talking about customer value. That's not anything. And so we really want to extend our definition of done to validated. And we want to reduce that time. So I know some of you are using cycle time. Fine, that's good. That's okay. Delivery time, I call it. But really, that's kind of like a illusory metric. It's maybe a vanity metric because nothing matters until we validate the thing. Have we built the right thing? And again, it's okay to not have the right thing the first time. That's why we need to reduce this time to be as quick as possible. So those of you who have boards, make sure you have a validate stage on your board. Done is not done until it's validated. So I don't know if maybe some of you already have this. Pablo, maybe you have it. Fernando, I don't know. You guys, you might be ahead of the pack, but really, this is we're kidding ourselves. We're fooling ourselves if we think we're done if we don't have a validation step. Okay, and this is just kind of reiterating that point. Business value can be determined only after delivery to the customer. Right? When I was building this online game, I thought it looked good. It looked good to me, but when we actually put it in front of users, a lot of things didn't work. A lot of things didn't make sense how they used it. And so we didn't know that ahead of time. You can't know it ahead of time. We're working in a complex environment, a VUCA environment. So we have to acknowledge that we're just placing bets. We're making bets. That's okay. That's one step closer to making sure that we're able to do the right things here. Oops. Okay, so this is a product owner again I worked with. She helped the team. She would give a developer or developers a problem to solve, and she would say, first of all, err on the side of simplicity, and just get it into the hands of the end user as soon as possible, so we can get that feedback. And that's again tightening these feedback loops. You might be thinking, is this really possible? Is it, can you really work without user stories? This is someone, she's in France. Uh, she says, for 6 months, I've experimented implementing without user stories for small increments. Just begin with the problem to be solved, propose, show the working software, and collect feedback and adjust. And it's worked very well in her context. So it is possible. People are doing this. People are reclaiming the spirit of Agile user stories. Again, don't hear me saying you need to completely chuck them, but I am emphasizing that we need to reclaim the original intent. We need to unlearn what we've done, right? So next time you look at your Jira board and you step back and you think, wow, are we emphasizing the things of the manifesto with this? Um, every time we start a story, does someone have a conversation with someone, the product owner, or is it meant to prevent conversation? How are you using your stories? So takeaways, less reliance on stories means fewer meetings. I think we all can appreciate that. More empowered and engaged teams. So I would even measure it. If you want to run this as an experiment, say you're going to try without user stories or really very, very slim user stories, whatever you want to say. If you do engagement surveys in your team or any kind of check, even informal, see how that changes. Does your team feel like they're more engaged, more empowered? Maybe not. Maybe this is all crazy. It's going to result in better solutions. Okay. Product people get good at declaring the problem. Don't worry so much about the solution. Let your team focus on that. And this is going to lead us to focusing on the right things, the more important things, delivering value. And it's going to lead to our customers actually being more pleased with what we're building. So I'll stop there. I think we have maybe 5 minutes for questions, feedback. You can tell me I'm crazy, loco. If you want me to go back, I can go back to some slides if I went too fast.
No, hey Matthew, how are you? It's Edison
Hey,
here.
hey there.
I love your comments, and I guess one of the things that I wrote is that we invest so much time on writing these user stories in a specific format and putting all the details and having nurture of all the things and details without acknowledging that we need to solve a problem, right? And we split and slide all the user stories and now we're delivering this and all that stuff. We usually forget, and I usually notice that we forget that the final goal of that delivery, that user story is we're solving a problem for the customer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting that you mentioned also when we close the user story, when we consider done that work, we're not considering the customer, which is the most important thing, right? It's only adding,
I'm done.
oh, how many user stories I completed at the end of a sprint. So I love all your feedback and details on examples and all that stuff. So thank you so much. I just wanted to share
Oh,
those
thank you. Yeah,
comments.
that's a great point. Yeah, because you're right. We just as soon as the story's done, we're done. We move on. Not my
Exactly.
problem, right? No,
8 story points. Good.
yeah, right. Who cares? Yeah, good.
Yeah.
I'll put this up.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Thank you too. That was great.
Could you, hi, this is Emmanuel. You could call me Emma. Could
Hey
you
there.
elaborate a little bit more about moving? Because it was surprising for me that sometimes I have low delivery between brackets, but we feel proud about like, okay, we get this big whale done. And could you elaborate a little bit more on context of that? I mean, which will be the
Yeah,
benefit?
yeah. Sorry, was it kind of this area? This one?
A little bit earlier, I think when
I
you
think the
talk
other
about
slide where you had the guys looking at the
low work
screen
in
with the
progress. Yes, with when you talk
Yeah,
about low
yeah,
work in progress.
yeah. Okay,
that
That
one.
one.
yeah. Sorry, what was your question again then?
Yeah, I have been noticing that sometimes my team has a low delivery rate between brackets, but all of them are pretty proud about, okay, we got this big thing done. I mean, and
Yeah.
I wanted to tie that maybe I have a problem with my team, but maybe you could explain a little bit more about low work in progress and how we will be beneficial for the team.
Yeah. So, so typically, so if you're familiar with Little's law, it states that there's a relationship between the amount of work that we have going on and the speed, the time it takes to get the work done, and throughput, which is the amount of work per period of time. And so, typically speaking, um, the less work you have in progress, the faster you'll produce it. Now you have to be aware of the throughput because you could have maybe too little work in progress. But when you say your team is not producing a lot or they're taking a while,
Yeah, sometimes they estimate, but when they finish something more complete of what they expected at the beginning, and they feel proud about it. But for me, sometimes it's like, okay, guys, we need to work on the refinement and be more accurate on the definition
yeah,
of the delivery. And maybe it's something that I shouldn't pursue. Maybe it's something that I let the team, and tied to the freedom that you were talking, let the team to say, okay, this is the problem, solve it,
yeah,
and give me an estimate, but it's not written in stone. Like, did
yeah,
it happen? Let it flush.
yeah. I think that's right. I mean, I have a whole talk on estimation and how, and I have some data around how our upfront estimates very rarely correlate to actual delivery time. But I think the more time we spend doing estimating, the less time we have to working on the problem. So I think I would, if I were you, let them work, help them understand the problem to solve, and tell them you need to solve the problem in the simplest way. Um, Now, one of the reasons user stories are useful is because it does help us think in smaller pieces. One of the problems I've seen over the years, though, is because we force teams to work in 2-week iterations or sprints, that it makes them make their stories into too small stories where they're not actually adding value. Um, and so I don't know if that's maybe part of the problem that you're having. Like, it's good that you want them to work in smaller bits, but if they're not really solving a problem at the end of it, it doesn't really matter. Like, we're solving for the wrong thing. If our goal is small bits of code or stories, but we're not solving a problem, we've emphasized the wrong thing. So does that help or?
Yeah, a lot, a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, I was talking to Edison. He's a colleague of mine, and I would say, I like how you frame the opportunity instead of seeing myself this as a problem. You see my point? I mean,
yep,
I feel engaged to look for solutions, and
yeah,
to let them more free. Thank you so
great,
much for that.
great. Martin, I see your hand.
Hi, Matthew. Very nice to meet you.
You too.
I was listening to this talk. It's very interesting what you were saying, but I cannot stop thinking about the business people. Right.
Hmm.
I've started as a developer. I've moved to management, different roles in the different organizations, and there's always this question about how business people take this, and by business people. I talk about, there's always someone that wants to know when it's going to finish. The resources are limited. There's money on the table. So what is your approach to that? Because I found that, many times product managers, project managers, even Scrum Masters use user stories or whatever, product increment, whatever you want to call it, a
Yep.
Jira ticket or whatever,
Yep.
to quantify the amount of work because they need to tell somebody when it's going to be done. So
Yep.
in an ideal world, we can say, okay, let's start building the product and we'll see when it finishes. When we have the best product, we can say, we deliver value or whatever. But in many companies, that's not the reality. Somebody is going to turn off the lights and say, okay, guys, I have no more money to continue with it, right?
Yeah.
So what is your approach to that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it should have a knock-on effect upstream, or however you want to think about it, on how we think about what we're doing. If we're just cranking out features and we're charging for features or whatever, but we're not really solving anything, the organization is going to go bankrupt. Right? It's going to be a dinosaur, right? Instead, if we're saying, and this is why that the orientation toward the problem actually helps us, because what we can start doing now is measuring, say we've got like a retailer or some kind of like online e-commerce. We measure click-through rates, right? I don't care what you do, just build something that's going to increase click-through rates or increase the size of your cart or your checkout, whatever. Improve the time it takes to complete a task, right? Those are actual things that we can quantify in terms of monetary savings.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start saying to people at the business level, how much is this improvement worth to you? If we can increase our order size by 5%, by 10%, how much is that worth to you? How much would you be willing to spend to solve that problem? And so it does, and it should change the nature of our conversations at the business level. At some point, though, I think what you're saying, I see this too, is that some people are so in the mindset of just saying, we're selling features. Here's the list of features. Go implement these things, because they say, we don't really care what the outcomes are. We just want to know how much it's going to cost to build this thing and be done with it. And so I would say that this approach, if you're the organization or your customer or whoever doesn't really care about true business outcomes, this is probably not going to be, it's going to be a frustrating experience. But if your organization cares about actually changing things and getting better outcomes, this will be the way to do it. Because you're right. I mean, if people are accustomed to saying, just tell me how long this is going to take. And I mean, first of all, this doesn't preclude the idea of being able to tell people when things are going to be done. We can say we solve a problem every month, or the time it takes us to solve a problem ranges from a week to 5 weeks. And how many problems you have? Well, you got 10 problems. Okay, well then you can do the math. So it doesn't mean, working this way doesn't mean we can't tell people when things will be done, but it does orient ourselves to outcomes rather than outputs. And if people just want to pay for outputs, then you might as well keep doing it the old way.
Okay. Hey,
Does that help?
you.
Yep.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Cool.
Bueno, estamos ya en tiempo de la sesión. Matthew, time's up, so we have to wrap up. Yes.
Okay. Thank you all. Muchas gracias. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Matthew.
Mucho placer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dami. Thank you all for coming.
Bye-bye. Thank you for your time.
Muchas gracias. Gracias,
Thank you.
Matthew.
Bye-bye.
Chao. Gracias.